Well, hello, everyone. Hello, Nadine. Here we are on the evening of September 10th, and it has been a day with some really quite unexpected events and tragedy, and a lot to think about, a lot to process. And I'm glad we have this program together, Nadine, and I'm glad we have this beloved community here in the 5'8" 5'8" community, and just here we are for the 5'8½, which, as you know, is a chance for us to reflect and think together and what is it? Sip. Hold on. So this is your midweek break.
Yes, here you are. It's a reminder. It is our reminder that we are not alone.
Yes.
And boy, we need that today. We definitely need the reminder that we are not alone today.
Yeah.
So it's great to see everybody in the chat thread. I hope everybody is taking care of themselves and remembering to breathe. I learned box breathing not that long ago, and it's very helpful. If you haven't ever relied on it when things get a little bit overwhelming.
What is box breathing, Nadine? Tell me more about it.
So box breathing is like you breathe in for 4, you hold it for 4, you exhale for 4, you hold it for 4, you inhale for 4, and you do that. I do it 4 times. Some people hold for 5, but that makes me feel like I'm about to pass out. But it calms your nervous system.
It could make me anxious. It's true. It's true.
Yeah, if you hold it for too long, but if you do it just right, it may have the same effect as breathing into a paper bag, where it just calms you. It reminds you. It puts you in your body, and it calms you down. And it's good right before you're going to go on the air, right before you've got a big thing to do, or when you get blindsided, sideswiped by really disturbing news, as we all have today. And so, yeah, do some box breathing if you were feeling that sense of unsettled, disturbed, and uncertainty that attends these moments.
Yeah. No, that is really, really good advice. I've been obviously following the news like so many people this afternoon and today. Actually, there's this obviously the murder of Charlie Kirk, which was just a shock. And then yet another school shooting in my home state in Colorado. 3 people were shot, 3 kids, I think, although I haven't had a chance to get caught up on that news. And that's in the wake of another school shooting and another one before that in Minnesota and Minneapolis. And this period of violence that we're living in is really, it's really shocking. I think sometimes we can become a little inured to it because the prevalence of so many guns in society and so few restrictions on guns has really led to this this period of real chaos in all sorts of places, sacred places, in public places, in other spaces, and we're also in a period where some people are resorting to assassination. We are looking at that today, even though Charlie Kirk wasn't elected to any position. He was heavily involved in electoral politics. And we saw that just 2 months ago in the assassination of Melissa Hortman, the leader, one of the longest standing and widely respected leaders in the Minnesota legislature, and her husband and their dog, and 2 other another legislator and his spouse who were shot, and a list as well. And so hard to believe that we're sort of back there in the sense of this period that we saw as a country in the 1960s of a period of political assassination. But it appears that we are in the midst of a period of not just broader gun violence happening on a regular horrific basis in our schools and more, but also people resorting to violence in response to their political beliefs.
Yeah. Well, in Minnesota, you mentioned the Democratic House Speaker, her husband, and colleague, who two of whom died. But Minneapolis was also the site of another shooting that killed 2 children, injured 17 more, and traumatized the entire congregation. This year alone, there have been over 300 mass shootings that have killed more than 300 people, left 1,300 wounded. And it's difficult to talk about this in this way because the fact that it doesn't really stop the news cycle anymore. The execution of Minnesota's Democratic Speaker of the House and her husband was but a blip. I mentioned it to somebody today, and they said, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And I said it again slowly, and they're like, "Oh, that's right. That's right."
Yeah.
You know? And then in April, Pennsylvania's governor had his Jewish governor, well, let me say it
Yep.
this way, governor who is Jewish had his residence firebombed during Passover. So I remember I wrote this thing some time ago. It was after the 2016 election, and there's a movie called Girl Interrupted, and
Yeah, I remember that movie. That
It's
had
the
Winona
story-
Ryder and Angelina Jolie. No,
right,
Winona Ryder.
and Vanessa Redgrave.
Oh,
It had
yeah.
Angelina Jolie. I definitely, but the scene with Vanessa Redgrave as the therapist with, was it Winona Ryder? Yeah, I guess
think
so.
Yep.
But she says this phrase in Latin, which is, "What world is this? What kingdom? What shores of what world?" And it struck me because I feel that way right now. Like, where are we? Where
Yeah.
have we landed? And I wrote this in the aftermath of the 2016 election, literally the day after. And I said, "We awake this morning in America that is given into its worst instincts, fear of difference, racist scapegoating, and a cruel hatred of women. This was a clash of tribes, one that believes they've put things right again, and the other that sees the promise of America shattered to smithereens. And so we find ourselves in this strange world where swagger and smears are the currency. How do we navigate when overnight the world has become even more dangerous? The loss is not simply of a preferred candidate. It is, as Shakespeare wrote, like another fall of man, a deep and burning betrayal executed literally by our neighbors." The awful familiarity of that last sentence has oddly given me some hope this morning. It reminded me of walking around my city in 2008 after the anti-gay marriage ban was placed in the Constitution, and I looked at my neighbors' houses, realizing 6 out of 10 of my fellow Floridians had thrown me to the wolves. They had ratified something mean, hateful, and dangerous and dehumanizing. But that loss became a turning point. It focused us, and we began to sift through all of this rubble and build a resistance that led us to victories, first in a handful of state ballot measures and then steadily through the courts. And in some ways, the attack on our families was evidence of our progress, of how close we'd come to that tipping point. So whatever group you're a part of, LGBTQ people fearing how far this backlash might push us, climate change activists alarmed that an arsonist now runs the environmental fire department, Black and brown people who see the surge of angry, rural white voters comforted by white supremacist rhetoric, young voters who sat this one out as an intentional strategy to shatter an already broken system, even those who, like the Brexiters, will come to regret the folly of their decision to follow the mob. We need to find each other in the rubble today. We need to look for the lights. As LGBT activists, we have traveled hostile and dangerous terrain before. We learn to find our friends in unexpected places. The hard math of this election is not the final equation.
Wow.
And so I share that because I feel that way right now. We are all wondering how we ended up in this place, and we have to find each other. So I am glad that we are doing the show tonight, even as people are processing what this means and processing the fact that gun violence has become so commonplace that we barely break our stride. But it is for us, this will stop when we decide that if you do not support common sense reform, a change in our gun laws that looks more like the rest of the world, that you forfeit your ability to lead, that it is a disqualifier immediately. And we can do around guns what the Tea Party did around taxes, frankly. No new taxes, no NRA money, no gun lobby, no more of our politics being held hostage to people who peddle in fear to sell their product.
Yeah. I so appreciate that column, Nadine, that you read. I'm going to reread it again after the show. It's just so beautifully put, and it also really is a call to that humanity that is so hard in some of these times where we're seeing people attack other people's rights, where we're seeing the sort of rhetoric that we see out of this White House on a regular basis. And it is this sort of shore, like, how did we get on this shore? It's like that. It is a little bit like the tempest. We've washed ashore on this land, and it is has these frightful moments. And I've been thinking about a couple things. One is one of my dear friends, Desi Walls, wrote a song about Veronica Guerin. She was a journalist who was assassinated in Ireland, and he goes through a series of events, and they sort of ask her why she kept writing even though her life was at risk, and then another part of the story they have that he talks about he sings about a family where the daughter died as a result of a bombing, during the IRA, during the Troubles, and the theme of that song is ultimately love wins, that we have to believe in love. We have to embrace love. And I've studied a lot over the years from my heroes, including, one of my most valued heroes, Martin Luther King Jr., and his principles of nonviolence as a way to achieve real change. And there are 6 principles. I'm just going to read them briefly. But one was that a person can resist evil without resorting to violence. And a second is that nonviolence seeks to win the friendship and understanding of others. The third is that evil itself, and not necessarily the people committing evil acts, should be opposed. And the fourth is those committed to nonviolence must be willing to suffer without retaliation. The fifth principle that he articulated is that nonviolent resistance avoids both external physical violence and also the internal violence of spirit, which I think is a real challenge. The feelings of anger that people have over our political circumstance, but what King wrote in, I think, Stride, or said in Stride, was the nonviolent resistor not only refuses to shoot his opponent, but he also refuses to hate him. And he also talks about, trying to be motivated by a sense of love, redeeming goodwill for all people. And then finally, and this is one of the things we've grappled with a lot of times in our Wednesday night show, he says the 6th principle is that the nonviolent resistor must have a deep faith in the future, stemming from a conviction that justice is possible. And when I was studying those words many years ago, I was also studying Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, and this notion of ahimsa, this idea of having being rooted in not just avoiding physical harm, but also those harmful thoughts that lead to violence, and that spirit of nonviolence as really the only really successful solution in a social crisis. That violence begets violence begets violence. Violence does not solve our problems, will not solve our problems, and can create unexpected additional harms. Tonight, I'm also reading a piece called "The Struggle Is Long" by Jeff Charlotte, and he has written about the elections, and he has written, I'll post it in the chat, but he's written about how we cannot give into being part of the, not just a match in the dry grass of our country, but a torch in terms of what could be ignited in terms of civil war and repression. And we have to really reach for our humanity in a moment like this, and not give in to the coarsening of our society, of our culture that some people have really promoted.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm of those, were there 5 or 6? I think there were 5. I'm pretty shaky on the first 4.
There are 6. There are 6. I'll post them.
Okay. Yeah, please do. I was pretty shaky on most of them, but the one about having an optimistic view of the future, I have that. I know that we're going to prevail. Shout out to Greg Olear. But I know we're going to prevail. The question is how soon and what is the cost between here and there. And I do believe that right now what we are seeing are microcosms of all of these things. The Trump talking about domestic violence like it's no big deal. The treatment of the women and girls who were sexually abused by Epstein and the circle that Epstein and Trump were a part of. The contempt of Trump towards E. Jean Carroll. You know, there is something that has to be lanced in America. We get to the place where we're almost ready to address it. You know, George Floyd, Ferguson, Black Lives Matter. We get to this place, and just as it really surfaces, and there's an understanding that to have truth and reconciliation will require us to confront hard truth. The recoil from that sends people into the arms of the people who will tell them, I will make a world where you don't have to. I will make a path where you don't have to confront those things. You don't have to address them. You know, I think about we're about to talk about SCOTUS, and we touched on this once before, but during the Kavanaugh hearings, when Dr. Ford testified, people believed her. They found her incredibly credible. They found her contemporaneous notes and the witnesses who could confirm, yes, that happened on that day after that party. She told me at the time, long before anybody knew that this guy would be anywhere near the Supreme Court. And it wasn't that people didn't believe her. They just thought it was too high a price for him to pay for his actions.
Yeah.
And until we're ready to confront this thing, it will keep showing up. And right now, this nihilism, this grievance politic leads us to isolation and people so entrenched in their fears that, you know, we have normalized mass shootings, 300 mass shootings so far this year, 300 people dead. And tomorrow we'll go on, we'll see another shooting, and we'll, you know, order a salad, because that is where we have gotten. That is the psychic toll that is taken. But we can change this.
Yeah.
You know, that is available to us to change that reality.
Right. No, I firmly believe that. And I really appreciate the call to hope from your essay, Nadine. This idea that things actually can change, and they can change in positive ways, and in some ways more quickly than we imagine, like on gay marriage, in a positive way, to go from those losses to really having a tremendous advance. But part of that change is through not giving up, through not letting those who have violence or violent views or regressive views prevail, you know, not giving in to that, you know, continuing to have the conversations with our friends and our family and our neighbors and our colleagues and coworkers about the kind of world we want to build, the kind of world we need to build together, and what that, what that looks like. So, yeah, I have, done a lot of work over the years around some of these right-wing groups and their policy agendas and the destructiveness of those policy agendas, but I would never have wished what happened today on any of them. As hard as it is with some circumstances that we face, and the type of greed, anger, and stupidity and hype and stuff we hear, I think we have to continue to really look to our humanity and to recognize that people who we may perceive as opponents or enemies, they're human beings. They're not super beings. This isn't Superman. They're not, they don't have, they're just other human beings. And it's tragedy. It's tragic when other human beings lose their lives. And I just wish we had greater compassion across the board for all the ways in which our society has embraced violence and made it more possible through policies, like you said, that the NRA peddles, and some of these politicians peddle, that are just reckless policies in terms of making weapons more readily available in ways that could harm and do harm people on a literally daily basis in America.
Yes, I want their bad ideas to die, and killing them is not how you stop bad ideas.
Yeah.
There is just one other thing I just want to say, because there's a quote by Kirk that is making its rounds about how he basically, the sum of it is, the right to bear arms, that people dying from gun violence is an acceptable loss, in order for people to be able to keep their guns. And the rest of the quote is, "We'll solve the problem by having more guards, more, more security in front of the places where we're vulnerable." And he was somebody with his own private security, the campus police. He was surrounded by the exact scenario that he prescribed, and yet it was not sufficient, and it never is. And the fantasy that you stop gun violence with more guns has proven once again to be a complete lie. We saw it in Uvalde. We see it everywhere. We saw it at Pulse. The presence of an armed guard, the presence of more guns did not save lives. So we're going to have to get serious about it. And that's going to take a lot of work, because we're dealing with a Supreme Court that is absolutely on its way to being the worst Supreme Court this country has ever had. And their most recent ruling that basically gave the green light to racial profiling. I know our friend Jim Stewartson called it the latest Dred Scott decision. And it's pretty heartbreaking, for Sotomayor and, the few progressives left, or I won't even say progressive, the few rational people on the bench, having to listen to and work with people who cannot see the humanity of Black and brown folks. So yes, the Supreme Court said, yep, you can racially profile. That can be part of your all you need to stop people, to intrude in their lives, to conduct searches, to detain them, to seize them, and to have that green light from the highest court is a terrifying situation, especially for those of us who are deliciously melanated. So, but you are our Supreme Court resident expert. What's your take on what the court did? Oh, you are muted.
I am. Guess what I just said. No, I said this is another appalling decision by the Roberts Court, by the Roberts majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I do want to dig into that, but let me just say on the gun issue, in my book about John Roberts, which is coming out on September 30th, called Without Precedent, I write a whole chapter about guns in America and how this court, the Roberts Court, has tried to rewrite our Constitution in order to expand access to guns and limit our ability to regulate guns. And one of the very first decisions issued by the Roberts Court was a decision to reverse well over 100 years of legal precedent. In fact, 200 years of actual precedent in the regulation of guns in America. And it was a decision that was written by Scalia, joined by John Roberts. And that decision in the District of Columbia struck down as unconstitutional gun rules that required guns to be locked up and secured, and limited access to handguns because of so much handgun violence that had happened in the district in previous years. And one of the things that I wrote about is how just months before that ruling, Antonin Scalia received the Shooting Ambassador Award by the international version of the National Rifle Association, and didn't recuse himself. It would have been a 4-4 decision, tied decision, but he did not recuse himself. And then immediately the NRA and its allies went to work attacking gun rules in Chicago, rules that made it harder, but had significant penalties for people who use guns in violent crimes in Chicago. So, this rhetoric around Chicago by the president, by Trump, by his regime, is irresponsible and reckless and destructive of our civil society and system. But it's also the case that if you want to address gun violence in cities, how about having some common sense gun laws that this Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, tried to make impossible until we find a way to reverse it. We find a way to reform it. But to your point, Nadine, and to the point of this session that we wanted to talk about, it is just also reckless, horrific, deeply destructive for this Roberts Court, these Republican appointees, to greenlight racial profiling. And what they did, again, this is another one of these shadow docket rulings, this ruling that's coming out of the Supreme Court without the benefit of a public oral argument, without full briefing, with a variety of publicly minded groups being able to weigh in, without the public being able to learn about those oral arguments, just behind the scenes dealing, where this arrogant, out of control U.S. Supreme Court has decided again to reverse a well-reasoned, well-grounded in the law ruling by lower court judges, saying that of course we cannot permit racial profiling under our constitutional system, under our system of respect for people's liberty and persons. And instead, this court, specifically with the blessing of Brett Kavanaugh, but also with the other Republican appointees, has again reversed a decision by a lower court that would have blocked this. In fact, had given a reprieve, a release to the previous sort of status quo in Los Angeles and now in other cities against the sort of profiling where they were just dragging people out based on their appearance, based on, as you said, the beautiful melanin in their skin tone, based on their surnames, based on an accent, based on what kind of job they had. This profiling is not based on a predicate of criminal violation. In fact, immigration law is not a criminal violation unless someone has been ordered deported and then returns. That is a felony under federal law. But these other circumstances, where people are working, doing their jobs, working at a food truck, whatever it may be, these are not crimes. And even in a criminal situation, or where there's an allegation of a crime, cannot engage in racial profiling under longstanding U.S. law. In fact, I worked on a report about statistics around racial profiling during the Clinton administration, because we'd seen and the American people had witnessed so much racial profiling happening by local police. New Jersey New York under Rudy Giuliani and his sort of squad of the police, people who were being harassed based on their race, and there was rightful and righteous rejection of those policies by most people, by most Americans, by most political leaders, and more, and by the courts. And now we have a U.S. Supreme Court helmed by John Roberts that is going out of its way to give not just permission to the Trump regime to engage in these deeply destructive actions, these racist actions, this stereotyping and racist racial law enforcement, basically, which isn't really law enforcement. It's just racial intimidation by these people who have badges, or they hide their badges, or they have a mask, but they're, an authority within ICE. This is dangerous, reckless, destructive, contrary to prior precedents, and contrary to the really good faith, well-written rulings of the courts below, again, in service of Trump. And so this court, this Republican majority on the U.S. Supreme Court, is not acting like a court. It's acting like an arm of the Trump team. It's acting like, not even like a MAGA court. I reject that terminology because it has the judicial power, but these justices are not acting as impartial justices. They're not following the precedents. They're not in many ways following common sense. What they're following is the political will, desire, whim, caprice of a regime that is, in essence, at war with the rule of law.
When I was looking at this, I want to underscore something that you said. It is your skin color. It is if you speak Spanish. It is if you speak English with an accent. If you are in a location where they say many people who are undocumented might go, you are fair game. And that mentality, I remember when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and there was this, people are like, oh, he slammed the door into the cop's, body. That's what precipitated this. But as you dove deeper, what you discovered was racial profiling in Ferguson was just the way of life. The numbers were, although Ferguson was about 2/3 Black residents, African Americans made up 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, and 93% of arrests. And it was just they would ticket people, Black people for jaywalking where they didn't ticket white people. There was no representation, and the anger and the humiliation of that constantly being stopped, interrogated, humiliated. Those were the factors that at play, and they have created an open season with this that says you get to harass people at will based on their skin color and their accent.
Yeah, and Ferguson, the other part of that was also that sort of debtor's prison.
Yes, exactly.
These fines, and then people, working people, poor people, people who were, not able to work, were facing these fines that then would become, a basis for incarceration, basically for being in debt based on, racist policing, racist police policies. And the Obama administration issued 2 reports. One of them I didn't like as much because I felt like it was a little bit too generous to the law enforcement in the state of Missouri. But the other was very clear on this really crooked system that was in place. And, and
it was a shakedown. It was a shakedown system.
Yeah. It really was. And then, this question of, it's not even a question. Like this court, this Roberts court and Brett Kavanaugh, they are sort of applying not just 2 sets of justice in terms of the rich and the poor, but 2 sets of rules, one for Democrats and one for Republicans. So as many of you recall, when Joe Biden issued a very modest set of student debt relief that was based on a federal law about allowing such debt relief in times of emergency in the aftermath of September 11th. The law is still on the books, and to talk about how COVID had affected so many people's jobs, and he was going to give a modest amount of, I think it was like $10,000 of debt relief if you had a certain income threshold. This Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, intervened and said the president could not do that. That was sort of a major question that only Congress could resolve, that this required affirmative new congressional legislation. And then similarly, when the Obama administration had issued rules through the EPA to have power plants just increase the percentage by a small amount of the energy they were providing from renewable energy to try to mitigate climate change. This court came in and said, no, the agency could not take that action without new congressional action, that this was a major question. This is a brand new so-called doctrine of this court, a doctrine that only applies to Democrats, apparently, because Trump has engaged in numerous actions. The regime that we now live under has issued, numerous orders to fire people, to take back grants that were already committed, to end programs that Congress authorized, to even try to kill agencies and divisions like the Civil Rights Division or Civil Rights Office within the Department of Homeland Security. All these different actions that that under that doctrine should require affirmative congressional action and not unilateral action by the president. And instead, when lower court judges are applying the law, applying precedent, following the rule of law, you now have this right-wing activist, extremist, in my view, group of politicians in robes who are just deciding among themselves in a very partisan way and over the objections of Democratic appointees that this administration can do almost anything it wants. And then you have it reflected in the words of Donald Trump just last week saying regarding Chicago and other cities, I'm the president. I can do whatever I want. That is the message that this group at the helm of the Supreme Court, with John Roberts at the top of it, is sending over and over and over again to this administration in ways that are deeply destructive to our economy, to people's lives, to families, to our communities, to science, to common sense. And so I am, really concerned about the fact that this Supreme Court has lost its mooring, and that we definitely are going to need to have a real movement for reform to restore our rights in the aftermath of the destruction of our rights by this captured judicial seat, a set of seats.
Yeah. Justice Sotomayor's dissent was very blunt. She said, we should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino. So I want to encourage people, learn Spanish, especially people who are citizens. If you are white and you are citizens, learn Spanish, speak with an accent, put a Mexican flag on your bumper. There's a whole movement of white women started it, I think, in California, basically to bait ICE agents to follow them, to stop them, and to waste their time. And so this is a moment to use the privilege of being a citizen to protect those who are being harassed. And we are seeing that. We're seeing more and more where people, even if they had some idea that, dangerous gang members will be taken out of the country, people who are somehow part of this threat that I've bought into will be removed and no longer present a danger. And now they're coming to the realization that that was a fiction that granted the power to go after your neighbors, the people at your favorite restaurant, the workers who are, putting your roof back on after a hurricane. And there are people who are awakening to the difference between what they believed through a lens of grievance and privilege and what they're actually doing in this world. So that is, we can't change SCOTUS overnight, but we can look out for our neighbors more aggressively, especially in places like Los Angeles and Chicago and all of the blue cities that people are being deployed to start the conflagration that Trump desperately wants there to be. And shout out Brandon. Yes. Right before I saw the news that Charlie Kirk had died, I saw the news that that the court had, an appeals court had struck down the ban on open carry in the state of Florida. So when it rains, it pours. And it's just a world in which you can, walk around outside of a schoolyard or campus with a long gun over your shoulder, and people have to figure out, oh, are you a law-abiding, open carry, gun owner, or are you someone who is about to make the news by shattering lives with that rifle? But we're all supposed to behave as though we don't, until they point it at you, everything they're doing is completely legal. I mean, this is madness, and we have to wake up from this haze.
Yeah. And speaking of madness,
Yes.
not all things are equivalent, but it was very interesting that this week the one of the House committees released significant portions of not the full set of the Epstein files, but a particular set involving the birthday book that Ghislaine Maxwell pulled together, a bound document that this administration has had the audacity to claim was faked, and the card that was in there along with all these other cards was not real. And Trump, got his lawyers to file suit against the Wall Street Journal, and now there's new material releasing not just the description of that card, but that card and other materials that have the same signature Trump was using at the time. Lawrence O'Donnell has a card, a note from Trump that he received that has the exact same signature as the bound book with Trump's signature in the, basically standing in for, standing in for hair for a woman. And again, the Trump team is denying this and denying that this is an accurate, that he wrote a card ever to his buddy. And of course, this was when they were, the period in which they were best friends, when they were described as best friends. It's not as though someone is saying that Trump wrote this card last year. This was a card from a period in which they were palling around, and the same period in which, Trump had talked about, how close they were, and how much he knew that Giuffre liked women on the younger side. I would submit that means girls, but and then we're coming into this conversation in the aftermath of just, I don't know, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, 4 days ago, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, absurdly asserting that Trump was an FBI informant, and then having to walk that back, because if he were an informant, it would mean that he was, fully knowledgeable about what was going on. And in fact, I think it's, in my opinion, Trump was fully knowledgeable about what was going on with Epstein and the girls, the minors that he was pursuing. So here we are with at least some action by House Democrats saying, this administration is trying to block the release of these files, the release of the Epstein files that Pam Bondi confirmed personally, specifically to Trump, includes his name numerous times. He's denied any wrongdoing, but they're all doing gymnastics to try to prevent these documents from coming out. And quite frankly, the notion that Trump was an FBI informant would be laugh out loud funny if the underlying circumstances weren't so horrific in terms of the sex trafficking that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in with Ghislaine Maxwell, and with the Trump administration rewarding Maxwell with this transfer to this Club Med, prison camp in reward for her claiming that Trump was a perfect gentleman, which I think we talked about last week. In my view, is something that has actually never occurred, that he's been the perfect gentleman toward her. There were also other details in that release, including Ghislaine Maxwell's topless pictures that she included in the book of herself for for Epstein, letters from other billionaires depicting women's breasts as part of the birthday wish and description for Epstein. So like, let's not kid ourselves. This was a lewd book that was created for not just a lewd man, but someone who was a predator, and then was ultimately convicted, or was pleaded guilty to solicitation when he was actually a predator, and then he and Maxwell were facing an array of charges, when he died, and then she herself was convicted of very serious charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison, because this wasn't just like a party. This wasn't just a light thing. This was a systematic trafficking of girls, of children, as well as predatory behavior toward women, and women who were of age, but who were still vulnerable in many ways. And it's just, what's disgusting is that we have a White House that is defending Trump and trying to prevent the victims' voices from being heard. And in fact, I'll stop here, an administration that went out of its way to ignore the voices of the survivors, and then to try to downplay them when they came together to object to this kid gloves treatment for Maxwell. So that happened too, among the other things.
Yeah, well, listen, I know there are people who are pointing out the accuracy of a 200-yard shot that hit a single target twice, and I can see the theories that are swimming in the comment section about the impact of that story on the Epstein story. And I have to say, nothing is going to remove this Epstein story from the headlines. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about it because the women who have come forward, when you say Trump was trying to silence them, he literally sent fighter planes over the press conference to disrupt the press conference. And if you've ever heard the sound of not just your average, passenger plane, but jets going overhead, they did it repeatedly. And somebody online said, why is that happening? And somebody in Trump's camp said, that's the sound of freedom, baby. It was just sort of like the most grotesque and disgusting way of adding insult to injury. But they are coming forward. They are Virginia. I cannot pronounce her last name. Her
Giuffre,
book just dropped.
Yep.
What's that?
I think it's Giuffre. Giuffre.
So her posthumous book is released with more information. And what's fascinating to me is, Mike Johnson just sort of going, he was an FBI informant. It's sort of like, do you know how you become an FBI informant? It's because you're dirty, and they get you to turn. And so there's no spin on that angle in which Trump is a hero. Like, people don't just stop by the FBI and say, "Hey, I'd like to be an informant. I'd like to. What kind of cases are you working on? Maybe I could help out." No, if you were in that relationship with the FBI, it's because you're dirty. They got you, and they're using you to pull down the rest of the network. But he quickly scrambled away from it. But we are seeing, they are attempting time and time again to figure out, well, what angle should we take? Okay, Epstein's bad, but Ghislaine Maxwell, she wasn't as bad. And in fact, she was helpful in getting, she was trapped in the same cycle that those women are. And, they're test ballooning all of these things. And they're trying to prepare the ground for an eventual pardon of her. But now these things are beginning to leak. It's not just that they're saying, "Oh, this isn't ours." They said that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
When the Wall Street Journal first reported it, that doesn't exist, right? That's just completely fabricated. And then, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have it?" That wasn't me. That wasn't what's that singer? She caught me red-handed. Like,
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't me, right? It was like
Well, it is. I mean, if it would be funny because it's like a 3-year-old saying that wasn't me, or that family circus where it's like, who did it? Nobody. You know, the little invisible kid with the little. You know, I mean, the excuses are appalling, and I cannot believe that we have a Justice Department that is so willing to subvert justice in order to protect this president. We also, by the way, had a Justice Department that just this week I was watching last night that we had, Pam Bondi coming in, not just to address the murder of the Ukrainian immigrant in North Carolina, but in the process of saying that the federal government was going to take on that case where there was this, tragic murder on mass transit. She went out of her way at least maybe 5, 6, 7 times on Fox, because I do monitor, the right and the left and the middle in terms of media to keep an eye on kind of how are things being covered. The Attorney General of the United States repeatedly said that they wouldn't trust progressive prosecutors. They wouldn't trust progressive DAs. This using this as an attack, a weapon against people who were elected to these positions by their community, who serve justice, who put away and, in jail many people who have committed crimes, who have done mitigation to try to help people who, have, drug addictions, to try to get them into treatment, like people who are thoughtful prosecutors who are trying to do their best by their communities. And now we have an attorney general who is politicizing murders. So I'm sure we're going to see a whole lot of politicization happening on steroids in the next few days and weeks. But to politicize a tragic murder as a way to attack people who are Democrats and progressives, and and with sort of hateful words in her mouth, spit that out to those Fox viewers, to have them not trust people who are prosecutors, who've spent their life, and I'm someone who, I worked at the DA's office for a brief time with the victim witness coordinator. I've helped support people who friends and allies who have been involved in making sure people have a just defense, have a fair defense if they're accused of a crime. And so it's not as though there aren't good people throughout the criminal justice system. There are some bad apples, that's for sure. But to have a Justice Department official using that office to attack other prosecutors, to politicize that murder in that way, was just grotesque.
Yeah. Well, listen, this is why we have to know our history, because the history of civil rights in America has been the history of what you do with a captured court that doesn't care about justice, serves a toxic ideology, what you do in a world where police, the difference between the law enforcement and, the Klan is, right now we're going, how can you tell the difference between some right-wing Proud Boy neo-Nazi and an ICE agent? You can't. They literally are dressing the same, masked up, all of these things. And so we do have these breadcrumbs from history about how you challenge those systems. I can't remember if I mentioned, I interviewed at Wide Awake America Ada Palmer, who's a historian and a science fiction writer. But one of the things, I didn't know that Voltaire dedicated a huge part of his life to ending public torture. Like, of all the things I think about Voltaire, that's not one of the things, but he said, she was saying in his lifetime, it went from, hey, let's get the kids and go down to the public square and, watch some torture, that'll be fun, to, hey, you know what? Torture is probably wrong. We shouldn't do it. We're going to stop that practice in his lifetime. But it's also the story of Ida B. Wells and lynching. Like, we can focus our attention even on this corrupt infrastructure, and we can change them and we can stop them. So that's why it's important for us to learn history, because it is depressing to see just how illegitimate these institutions that we try to hold up, or we expect there to be some integrity in, and it can be completely dispiriting.
Yeah. But
history tells us, this happens, and we know how to get home from here.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I was going to say, Nadine, as much as I would love to talk about the really disturbing developments in terms of Putin and Poland and and drones, and also talk a little bit more about Trumpflation, which is on the rise. I think it's probably been a long day for lots of folks.
It has been.
And I wonder if we should try to move over to our glass half full. While you do that, I'm going to grab my glass half full.
Okay, you grab your glass, and I will just, as you do that, I'm just going to say two things. Poland, the drone strike in Poland. I mean, if anything underscores what a total failure Trump's meeting with Putin was. I mean, you almost have to say, let's stop pretending that had anything to do with negotiating peace. Whatever that meeting was about, it was Putin absolutely left it feeling emboldened. Went to meet with the the evil Axis, and Trump sent notes like a jilted teenager that he wasn't invited. I hope you have fun. It was the most passive aggressive, sassy pants thing so Poland is more evidence that Trump is compromised and incompetent, and that Putin feels as though he is absolutely emboldened by the weakness of this president. And then Trumpflation, I just want to say, if you have a chance, if you haven't seen probably one of the most fascinating conversations about how, if you're in the stock market, you're going to do fine. Inflation going down means interest rates get cut, liquidity skyrockets, all your stocks are going to do great. And for everybody else, it is the head of McDonald's was talking about how they've got two different menus. One that recognizes that people are showing up with just a few dollars. So we got to have things that you can go in and get a sad hamburger for $1.50 and some, cold fries. But your buddy who's in the stock market can get a double, what do they, double quarter pounder with extra cheese, and a jumbo size everything for $25, and how they stack that it is a perfect metaphor for the economy. And so anyway, it is well worth just listening to how they think about, even as they recognize this economy is absolutely screwing the majority of Americans, that some people are going to do fine, and those people have influence and power.
Well, and I do want to have a deeper conversation about Trumpflation next week, because I think there's a lot of work we can do together in social activism to really name the names, show people, tell people what the effects of these policies are, these tariffs are. I myself bought some cereal the other day, and on the front, the box looked exactly the same size. And when you turn it to its side, it literally had shrunk to like the size of a small book. And when I checked the ounces, of course, it had changed on the front. But Trumpflation is affecting everyone, and we have a lot of work to do to really have more and more people understand the pack of lies they've been told by Trump about our economy, and how, what we can do and what we can do together. But so that I'm excited about that campaign. Yeah. I think it has a lot of potential because it affects almost all of us, except for the Wall Street execs, like you say, for the most part. And so there's more to do. Oh yes, and yeah. So I'll stop there because I think we should give it a wrap. But yeah, let's talk about that next.
Well, first of all, I do just want to say thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight, because it's, it was a weird night. It was hard to know how all of this is going, how we were going to get through tonight with everything happening. And so I appreciate it. But I mentioned Ada Palmer, who I highly encourage, look her up, Ada Palmer. Great. She was a guest on Wide Awake America, and I'll be posting that show soon. But one of the things that I like to ask 5 questions at the end of the show, and one of them is, what do you do to keep yourself up when times are hard? So I'm going to credit her with pointing me towards a newsletter called Fix the News. And it is a wonderful website because it looks at the world not just through the short-term doom scroll that we look at day in and day out, but the long-term arc of how lots of things are getting better, lots of things are improving in the world.
Lots of things are getting better. Sorry, can I just
Yeah.
repeat that for a second?
Yeah, no, it really is.
Lots better.
Prison, the prisons are less full. The worldwide battle against diseases is improving. There are so many good stories, but they're not flashy. They don't, if it bleeds, it leads. These are stories of incremental change accumulating over time to these massive, huge impact events. There are billions of more, there's more people with access to clean water than ever in the history of the planet. There are these stories that it's not one big breakthrough. It is this, it's water against the rock, and the rock finally breaks, and we don't take time to celebrate it. And so Fix the News has become one of my daily stops because it is a reminder that while we are caught in a certain kind of news cycle, there is a larger timeline unfolding. And that the work that we do right now actually adds up to that change. So if you are feeling down, if you are feeling overwhelmed by the doom scrolling and the hard news out there, I highly encourage subscribe to Fix the News, because it's not fluff. It's really powerful things that you otherwise may not see, because it's not necessarily sexy or lascivious or any of the things that so feed this fear driven media cycle that we find ourselves in. But it is deep and profound and transformational, and it reminds you that over time we actually are doing some really good things on this planet, and it's important to hold on to that hope. So, to fix the news, to that larger cycle of good, we lift our glasses and say, the glass is half full. Cheers.
And you are not alone. We are not alone.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, everybody. Lisa, wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too, my friend, and wonderful to see you all in the chat. And hoping folks tune in this Friday with Greg, Oliar, and Stephanie, and possibly Nadine. I'm going to be enjoying some music that night, so I won't see you all if it's a trio. But
yeah.
Please.
And if I can be on it, I'm going to bring my mead. I have homemade mead. So,
excellent.
Right, listen.
I'll bring mead next time, and me mead next time. But please tune in this Friday, and then we'll see you all next Wednesday for the 5, 8 and a half. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.